So let's talk about the purines for a bit, because I think that's an area people could get a little bit confused in, because a lot of the previous guests on the show advocate for eating organ meats as being super nutritional. And I don't think you'd argue that point, but we're talking from a purine perspective here. And then also things like red meat and fish. And so what for somebody who is going to consume those, say on a moderate level, is there certain things that we can eat alongside them or certain supplements we can take when we know we're taking in a moderate amount of purines in a meal to help dampen that conversion to uric acid?
That's an excellent question. And, in the book, we have, several sections dedicated to what and how to eat. And indeed, we supply recipes, and some of them are chicken and red meat. And we don't have recipes dealing with the organ meats because of their purine content being so high, but there are plenty of purines in red meat and white meat and in fish. But yet, here's where two things come into play. Number one, being judicious about your quantities. 6 ounces is not unreasonable. I do that myself, and I know my uric acid level runs around 4.5. Uh, and number two, looking at the differences between the various foods in terms of their purine content. Even some vegetables can be pretty darn high in purines, like mushrooms and the cruciferous vegetables. They have quite a bit of purines, but the data shows that on balance, they do not raise uric acid, and therefore I would say eat them with abandon. If you choose to eat various types of meat and fish, etc., go for it, but watch your portion size. Be more judicious as it relates to eating the organ meats and the game meats, the venison, for example, the deer, the ostrich, whatever you may eat, because again, they're a little bit more hypercellular, have a little bit more purines that they will produce. But it really depends, and then this point number two, on the individual. How does he or she respond to the consumption of those purines? 2/3 of the purines in your physiology right now are not from the foods that you eat, but are actually from the breakdown and the recycling of your own tissues. Especially if you exercise aggressively, you'll break down muscle tissue. And as those cells are broken down, they are going to liberate their DNA and RNA, and your body will convert them to purines, which will ultimately increase the uric acid. It's why, as in our book, we talk about when to check uric acid. And one of the times that you don't want to check it is that next morning after a really vigorous workout. I did an interview yesterday with a woman named Gabby Reese. She's an Olympic gold medal winner in women's beach volleyball. And, she's a very high-end athlete. And I said, when you're moving forward and going to check your uric acid, you sure don't want to check it the next morning after a very vigorous workout. So keep those things in mind. Now, what about the mitigators that you talk about or bring up? Very, very good point. The early research in looking at controlling uric acid, the interventional trials that first began with laboratory rodents and then moved on to humans, would elevate uric acid aggressively by giving first the rodents and then in human studies something called, who knew, fructose. In the drinking water of the rodents, or just saying to these test subjects, over the next couple of weeks, you're going to drink 200 grams of fructose a day, which seems like a lot, but I bet you there's some teenagers who do that. And immediately in the animals and in humans, they would develop all kinds of metabolic issues like high blood pressure. And what they found and published was that here they develop high blood pressure, their uric acid level goes up, they gain weight. And what is causing that? Is it directly from the fructose? Well, what they did was really quite clever. They gave them all this fructose, but they gave them a drug that is used actually to treat gout that would reduce the production of the uric acid. So still getting the fructose and now blocking uric acid production, and lo and behold, the metabolic issues did not occur. So that really helps us identify that the player here is uric acid. That's the signal that your body uses to gain the weight, to raise the blood pressure, to become insulin resistant. So this drug, allopurinol, a relatively safe drug, so the studies were conducted. Nonetheless, we know that certain bioflavonoids like quercetin work and luteolin work in such a way, targeting the exact same pathway that allopurinol works, and that is targeting a very important enzymatic step in the formation of uric acid called xanthine oxidase. So these natural products available from the health food store, 500 milligrams, my recommendation for quercetin, 100 milligrams for luteolin, work in the very same way. Now, it doesn't mean that, you pop a couple quercetins and off you go drinking a couple of cans of soda and everything's going to be rosy. Maybe it will be, but you have to be darn sure that your program is one that allows you to follow your uric acid levels and make changes based upon these inputs to keep it where it needs to be.
And when you talked about that study with rodents, you mentioned they were using fructose. Has there been any research or anything that you've come across that when it comes to the purines, that it can block that conversion as well? Or do the same supplements work in both cases?
This xanthine oxidase targeting is downstream from purine metabolism. So that will encompass the purine inroads to uric acid as well. So, again, this is, the fundamentals here are really not to end the uric acid once it's elevated and accumulating in the body, but to really look at where did it come from in the first place. And there are three inputs I mentioned: fructose, the purines, and certainly alcohol. But there's one other player that I want to talk about because I think it's really very important, and that is that dietary salt. What does it do? Dietary salt helps convert the blood sugar that we have, the glucose, into fructose. So it's not just the fructose that we consume in the various foods that we eat and should avoid, but we can actually enhance our own endogenous production of this signal, this warning signal, through fructose metabolism to get ready for winter. Dietary salt is telling us that, well, it's not really relevant in terms of food availability. It's telling us, it's simulating in our bodies that we are dehydrated. When you don't have water, the first thing that happens is your sodium goes up in your bloodstream, and that puts into play a variety of mechanisms that help your body conserve water. And one of those mechanisms, either if you become dehydrated or you simulate it by consuming a lot of sodium, is the manufacturing of fructose from glucose. Now, what does that do? Fructose downstream becomes uric acid, and that tells your body, get ready for winter, make fat. Now, why would you want to make fat if you're dehydrated? What would be the connection? Well, it turns out that when you metabolize fat, you are producing in your body two things: carbon dioxide and free, fresh water. Body fat is a wonderful storage depot from which your body can make water to help you survive when you can't find water. What do you think the camel's hump is all about? That's not filled with water. It's not like you could stick a straw into a camel's hump and have water when you're crossing the desert. It's full of fat. As much as 80 pounds it can weigh, the camel's hump. And what does that allow that camel to do? Sure, these are fat calories that allow it to have a source of energy. But beyond that, it turns the fat into water so that camel can survive walking across the desert. Whales are very, very fat, but they don't have any source of fresh water. They live in salt water. They don't look around for an underwater spring and drink the water. They are making fresh water, which they need in their physiology. They don't drink seawater. They're making fresh water from their body fat. So, one of the fattest animals on the planet in terms of percentage of body weight that's fat is the hummingbird. Who knew? These hummingbirds make these thousands of mile treks, from North America to South America or wherever they end up going. And prior to that, as much as 40% of their body weight can be fat. And if you want hummingbirds in your backyard, what do? You put out a container of sugar water. What is table sugar, sucrose? It's 50% fructose. So they are triggering this mechanism. They're laying down body fat, and lo and behold, they have energy source for their long trip and a source of water for their long trip as well. So it's interesting to consider that Making body fat was a survival mechanism, not just because it gave us a source of energy and insulated us against the cold, but it also is a depot from which we can make fresh water.
If you enjoyed that clip, press here for the full episode. I'll see you over there.
And even going from 1970 to 1990, in America, adults consume now 1,000% more fructose. It's not just the calories. It's not just that it's a sugar. It is a